My father called from halfway across the world, saying my mother was dying in the ER and needed money right now. I gave him the safe code, walked out of a 2-year business deal, and flew home. But when I opened the door, she was in the kitchen, cooking spaghetti, smiling like nothing happened. And the safe? Empty. $9 million. Gone. What they didn't know, I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. I was halfway across the world when my phone rang. Tokyo, mid-morning. A glass-walled conference room high above the city. Below, the streets buzzed with that precise, almost choreographed energy you only see in Japan. We were 15 minutes away from finalizing a contract I had been stitching together for over 2 years. 2 years of red-eye flights, tense boardroom negotiations, and careful cultural diplomacy. My assistant was across the table, her eyes flicking between the client and me, silently urging me to stay focused. And then my phone lit up. Dad. My father never called unless something was wrong. Not mildly inconvenient wrong. I mean life-ending wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your stomach turn cold before you even answer. I stepped out into the hallway, heels clicking against polished wood, the distant hum of Tokyo muted behind the glass. His voice trembled, almost theatrical, but at that moment I didn't question it. "Maurice," he said, "it's your mom. She's been in an accident. They rushed her to the ER. It's bad. They need money for surgery. Now." My throat tightened. I didn't ask how it happened. I didn't ask which hospital. I didn't even question why his tone felt off, like he was performing grief rather than feeling it. Instead, my mind went to the only thing that mattered in that moment, getting her what she needed, the safe. "It's 9261, I told him. "Get what you need. I'll be on the next flight." He thanked me, but his voice was already fading, like he had somewhere else to be. I hung up and stood in the quiet corridor for a long moment, my heart beat loud in my ears. Then I walked back into the conference room, bowed in apology to the stunned board members, and left behind a deal that could have changed my career forever. It didn't matter. Family came first. 15 hours, 1 airport hotel nap, and 3 unanswered emails later, I stood in the driveway of my childhood home in Los Angeles. The house looked the same. Same cream-colored siding, same rose bushes trimmed into those silly spirals Mom loved. For a woman supposedly clinging to life, she sure kept her landscaping tight. I unlocked the door, bracing myself for the smell of antiseptic, the sight of half-packed bags, maybe a neighbor in the kitchen making tea to calm my father's nerves. Instead, there she was. Mom, in her favorite apron, stirring marinara sauce, humming some old tune from the radio. She turned at the sound of the door. "Oh, Maris, honey, what are you doing here?" I froze in the doorway, my suitcase still in hand. "Dad said you were in an accident," I managed. Her brows lifted. "An accident? What accident?" It felt like the floor shifted beneath me. I walked past her, down the hall, straight to the study. The safe, hidden behind the bookshelf, stood wide open, empty. $9 million. 15 years of work, investments, sleepless nights, gone. That's when I realized something I wouldn't admit out loud. Not yet. They had planned this. And what they didn't know, the code I'd given them wasn't the real one. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I stood there in the study, staring at the empty safe. Not a scratch on the door. No signs of a break-in. Just a clean, deliberate theft. The kind you can only pull off when you already know the layout. And the owner. When I came back to the kitchen, Mom was rinsing spinach like nothing had happened. Dad sat at the dining table, flipping through the sports section. My sister, Seren, wandered in, tossing her car keys onto the counter. Brand new BMW. Still had that new car smell. No one asked why I was home early. No one mentioned Tokyo. It was like I'd walked into a dinner party I hadn't been invited to. That night, I lay awake in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan. Every creak of the house sounded different now. Calculated, intentional. By 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I reached for my tablet, logged into the home security system. The logs were still synced to my account. And there it was. 3:12 p.m., Tuesday. The day Dad called me. The system had been manually disabled, accessed by fingerprint. Mom's fingerprint. My jaw tightened. The woman who told me she hadn't stepped into the study in years had opened the safe the exact hour she was supposedly in an ER bed. So, I kept scrolling. A 20-minute gap in the hallway camera footage, the one facing the study. Someone had deleted it, but my recovery software salvaged 2 short clips. The first, Mom walking alone toward my office. The second, Dad, just behind her, followed by a shadow. Slim build. Hair pulled back. It wasn't Seren. It wasn't the housekeeper. It was Mom again, this time with that familiar limp in her left foot. She lied. She had been there. In the morning, over coffee, I asked her casually, "Were you really in the hospital last Tuesday?" Her spoon paused mid-stir, just for a second. Then she smiled. "You're imagining things again, honey." And in that moment, I knew she could lie to my face as easily as she breathed. Later that day, I went through my locked desk drawers. One folder was missing, bright green, labeled Estate Protections. Inside that folder had been my signed power of attorney documents, my legal claim to certain family assets. It wasn't about the cash. It was the leverage they now had in their hands. Only 3 people even knew that folder existed. All of them were under this roof. Twice. I shut the drawer slowly. The anger was there, yes, but under it, something sharper. Resolve. I wouldn't storm into the dining room screaming. I wouldn't demand answers. Instead, I decided to wait and watch, because sometimes silence tells you more than questions ever will. 2 days later, I decided it was time to move. Not to attack, not to accuse, just to observe. If they thought I was the quiet, dependable daughter, the one who always showed up but never spoke up, I was going to let them keep thinking that. And then I'd watch what happened when I placed the right pieces on the board. Then that morning, I called Mom, told her I'd be cooking dinner for everyone. Her voice was warm, almost cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "Just like old times," she said. Exactly. Just like old times. The kind of old times that made me stop trusting them years ago. I went all out. Beef tenderloin, garlic asparagus, warm bread. I even folded the napkins into perfect little swans, the way she liked them for special occasions. The kind of small, sentimental detail that lowers people's guard. When they arrived, the kitchen filled with the sound of polite greetings and the faint clink of silverware. Dad was the first through the door, always early. Then Seren, wearing that smug glow that comes from getting away with something. And finally Mom, on Dad's arm, smiling like the perfect hostess in someone else's house. We ate, and the conversation stayed light. Traffic, weather, Dad's latest property investment in Pasadena. Mom complimented the bread, said it reminded her of the bakery we used to visit after church. Every word was rehearsed, safe. Every smile, too perfect. Halfway through the meal, I dropped my first line. "Remember that time," I said, slicing into my steak, "when I found the safe code scribbled on the back of a grocery list?" Dad froze, fork halfway to his mouth. A dry chuckle escaped him. "That old thing. You had a knack for finding things." I smiled, just with my lips. "Yeah, I remember thinking some things weren't meant to be found. But maybe some things are left out in the open for a reason." Mom didn't speak. She just sipped her wine and kept sipping. We wewanana said you. The silence stretched, thin and sharp, before Calder, my brother-in-law, stepped in. So, Maris, he said lightly, what's been keeping you busy these days? I kept my voice calm. Productive trip, and I met with my lawyer this morning. We went over a few triggers in the estate protections, just in case anything unusual were to happen. Mom's fork clattered onto her plate. She muttered something about Butterfingers, but her eyes betrayed her, a flicker of panic before she smoothed it over. That was all I needed. Not a confession, not a slip of the tongue, just that fracture in her composure, the kind that tells you the truth is standing right there, hiding behind a smile. I poured more wine for everyone, raised my glass. To family, I said. To the things we don't say out loud, the secrets we carry, and the ones we think will protect us. No one moved. No one clinked glasses. I set mine down. The test was over, and I had my answer. It didn't take long for them to make their next move. A week later, my lawyer, Silas, called me in. His voice was clipped, precise, the way it gets when he's holding back bad news. Maris, he said, your father and Calder filed documents last week. You've been removed as beneficiary of the family trust. For a moment, the words didn't register. When they did, my first thought wasn't anger. It was calculation. Of course they did, Silas went on. They used what appears to be your signature on a mutual release form. It's dated the day before you flew back from Tokyo. A forged signature. They weren't even subtle about it. By the time we stepped into the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. The judge, a woman in her late 50s, sharp suit, sharper eyes, called the session to order. Their lawyer was up first, confident, smug. He handed the judge a thick stack of papers, claiming they were email exchanges in which I'd offered the money as a gesture to make amends for past family tension. The emails looked convincing. Right font, right phrasing, but not my words. When it was our turn, Silas didn't waste time. He queued up the first piece of evidence on a small screen facing the judge. The video played. A dimly lit meeting room. Calder's voice unmistakable. I just need a clean trail, doesn't have to be real, just convincing. A fabricated email chain shouldn't be hard. Then Noor's voice, my business partner, calm and professional. Payment up front, in coin. I don't want it traceable. The judge's pen stopped moving. We followed with a time-stamped video from Dubai. Me speaking directly to a U.S. consulate staffer, pre-registering the access code to my safe, and explicitly stating that no one, including family, was authorized to access it without my written consent. The date? 2 days before Calder claimed I'd given the money away. The room went silent, except for the faint hum of the court's overhead lights. I didn't look at my family. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of their stares, the silent calculation in their heads as they realized the game had changed. The judge spoke at last, her voice level but firm. A separate date will be scheduled to address criminal matters. No raised voices, no gavel slam. Just that quiet, decisive sentence, and the knowledge that they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Walking out of the courthouse, the air felt lighter, not because the fight was over, it wasn't, but because the truth was now on record, no longer mine alone to carry. That night, after the hearing, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove. No destination in mind, just the hum of the road and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Somewhere between the courthouse and nowhere, I realized I needed to see the house one last time. Not for closure, I stopped believing in that a long time ago, but to look them in the eye and say, without words, that I wasn't afraid anymore. I parked a block away, walked the familiar path past the rose bushes, still trimmed into spirals, still pretending everything was fine. The front door wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. Dad's voice floated from the den, sharp and impatient. You said she wouldn't show. You told me she was still in Dubai. I stepped into the kitchen doorway. Mom sat at the table, hands folded, her eyes fixed on a spot in front of her like she'd been staring at it for hours. She didn't look up. It was never about the money, I said quietly. That got their attention. Silence filled the space between us, heavy and deliberate. It was about proving I'm not the weak one. On the hallway wall, I saw something I hadn't noticed in years. A framed sketch I'd made in college. A girl standing alone under a tree. They used to laugh at it, call it melodramatic. Now it hung here, like some kind of trophy. I took it off the wall, not roughly, not to make a scene. Just to take back something that had always been mine. As I walked to the door, Mom's voice finally broke the silence, barely above a whisper. You always were better than them. I didn't stop. I didn't thank her. I just opened the door and stepped into the night. Outside, the air was cooler, the kind that feels clean, even when it isn't. I held the sketch close to my chest as I walked to the car. Not because it mattered as art, but because it was a reminder. A reminder that my value was never theirs to give or take. But the fight wasn't over. There would be more hearings, more paperwork, more calculated moves. But they'd already lost something far more valuable than money. They'd lost their mask. And me? I'd finally stopped trying to earn a place I was born into. In the end, it was never really about $9 million. Money can be lost, earned again, and lost once more. But dignity, self-respect, those are harder to rebuild. They thought they could erase me from my own life, rewrite the story without my consent. What they didn't realize was that I had already written my own ending, and it didn't include them. As I walked away from that house for the last time, the cool night air felt like freedom. They could keep the roses, the walls, the hollow traditions. I was keeping the one thing they could never touch, the knowledge that I had survived them, and I would never go back.